All right. Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started pretty soon. I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and welcome back if you were here last week. So as always, the format of the event is going to be a little bit of an introduction with our panelists here, and then we'll go into some pre-prepared questions, and then you'll all have the chance to send in your own questions to the chat, which I'll then read off, and we'll get that answered as well, too. So just to start off, my name's Janu, and I'm a third-year transfer at UCLA. My major is economics, and I'm hoping to go into investment banking. And yeah, I'll just hand it over to Khiry here for a little introduction as well.
Got it, Khiry. So, hey everyone, my name is Khiry Kemp, and I'm here to, help out and answer any questions that you guys may have as you begin your consulting journey. Janu, thanks for having me. Really honored to be a part of this event and pretty much, share what I can. I graduated from UCLA in 2017. And, I'm sure you guys might know by now that I started management consulting with Deloitte and strategy and operations practice. Stayed with them for just about 2 years, and then I kind of transitioned into my own thing where I created an edtech software company and a nonprofit to help high school students. So I guess I'll kind of stop there and see, Jana, where you want to take it now.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll just go ahead and get started. And real quick before we do, for everyone, if you could please follow our social media, our Instagram and our Facebook, and also join our mailing list. You can find all of that information at bruintransfersandbusiness.com. I'm not sure if you all know, but this is a 3-panel series. So next week will be our 3rd panel at the same time. So please join us for that as well. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So I just kind of wanted to know, you had an interesting career path to kind of get to the point that you are. Did you always know what you wanted to do, or did you kind of just find your path along the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that for me, so as you started to get into like the recruitment, I guess, circuit, right? You start to see all the company presentations, you get to see, all the events on campus. I think that the ones that really just kind of piqued my interest were the consulting events or the investment banking events. Partially, I think that there were a lot of factors that went into it, whether it was like maybe the prestige associated with it, or just how cool the job seemed to be. I was like, okay, what would I have to do to get one of those kind of jobs? And as I went to the corporate presentations, I found that I better aligned with the consulting presentations. And then from there, I just kind of dove in and surrounded myself with a bunch of the people that I met at those consulting events, whether they were already working at the firm or in the audience like me, just so that we can do prep cases together and just really, the more immersed in it I became, the more I knew that it was like definitely what I wanted to do out of college.
Right. Yeah, no, it's sometimes hard to be able to find your path right away, especially just transferring in. You kind of don't have much time to figure out what you're interested in. So it's nice to know that you can kind of switch around even after you choose a career path or, choose a different company to work for if you don't feel comfortable. So I also wanted to jump into, as transfers, there's a little bit of a stigma, and it's maybe a little bit harder at certain companies to find internships and jobs. And I just wanted to know if you faced anything that was related to this, or if you have any advice on what we can do to avoid that or get around it.
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. So for full transparency for everyone on the line, I'm really honest, and in terms of answering these questions, I'm never gonna try to inflate anything or make it seem like I'm anything that I'm not. So I give you guys just the honest truth. And what happened was I actually ended up taking I did an extra fall semester. And so what I did was essentially when I started, I had already missed everything. Like I didn't know how fast recruitment had started. So in my first year as a transfer, by the time I was like, oh yeah, I wonder if these guys are hiring, it was like, oh, you already missed the deadline. I was like, what? Then I think by the time I did my second year, I was like really deep in there. I was doing a bunch of interviews, and then I had secured an offer, and I took an extra quarter in the fall just so that I could, go through the recruitment cycle again and kind of like trade up my offer. But essentially, one of the main reasons why I was compelled to be here today and help you guys is because I didn't want you guys to miss the first window like I had. And so I'm trying to get you guys caught up to speed. I also see that Catherine is on the line, and she's someone that I know already. And as she was getting ready to transfer into UCLA, one of the first things I told her was, hey, you got to hit the ground running. Next thing you know, you're going to just like enroll in class, or not enroll in class, you're going to attend like first day of class, and then like corporate presentations are going to be like that week or like the next week. So essentially, in terms of being a transfer, I think that you do have very little time to get acclimated to what's going on when you first arrive. I don't see any problem with taking an extra quarter if that's something that you want to do on the back end, because fall is like the time to recruit. And then since I had secured my job offer, I did like a study abroad, like, in the winter and spring, just to kind of take a little victory lap before I started work. But essentially, in terms of that stigma, I think that there's a lot of challenges like getting caught up to speed as a transfer with knowing, what's going on, which companies should I go attend or network with. And frankly, you haven't had enough time to form a network, at some of these companies that you'd want to recruit at. And so that's one thing. Second is, I think that people get into their own heads from what I've seen. They're like, oh, I'm a transfer, but this person is not, and they kind of psych themselves out. At the end of the day, these companies are looking for qualified applicants who can do the job. It doesn't matter if you're a transfer. It doesn't matter, what race you are. It doesn't matter. There's a lot of things that people tell themselves to psych themselves out, and it's just really not true. It's just, you need to believe in yourself and be diligent, of course, and be, study rigorously for the case interviews. I'm not going to tell you that that's easy, but, by any means, but, it's just working hard and overcoming the fact that we're kind of showing up a little late to the party. And if you do that, and you kind of, network well, you reach out to others who have done it before you, just as you guys here are all doing by being a part of this fireside chat. I think that you'll be in a really good spot when those interviews roll around.
All right, got it. Yeah. No, that's some really great advice. And kind of just going off of that. So I remember, and of course, with different industries, it's a totally different, outcome as far as how many interviews you get and things like that. But a couple of our panels before had said, obviously this isn't confirmed and you can't really ever know for sure. But did you feel like with any companies that you did apply to for internships or for jobs that you were maybe turned down because you were a transfer, or someone else was put above you in line because they weren't a transfer? Or did you pretty much feel like in your industry it was like a level playing field?
Well, to be completely honest about that question, I think that you don't, as long as you do have coursework from UCLA, and I guess everyone has their own choice, so you don't have to exactly take me word for word on this, but you don't necessarily have to put your community college like information, right? Because as long as you have coursework and you have grades and you did well, let's say your first quarter, you can say you have a 4.0, if you've taken 3 classes and got all A's. So as far as they're concerned, you're someone who has a 4.0 from UCLA, and that can help get your foot in the door. However, and this is where I'll be a little blunt, you're kind of wasting everybody's time if you're not prepared for the interview once you get it. So one thing that I say is, getting the interview for some may be a challenge in itself, but also there's the whole backside of actually like, you got the interview, so now what? Where if you're not prepared for that, you might even shoot yourself in the foot, because a lot of the companies that people, aspire to work at, they may not look at you again if you completely just blow it the first interview, right? So, I would put less emphasis on just like trying to get the interview, and kind of like faking it rather than like being really ready to get the interview. And, maybe, of course, like I said, possibly having some UCLA coursework. That way you can just put your UCLA GPA. I've heard about other tricks as well, as maybe doing the math and actually doing like an overall cumulative like GPA, including your CC work. But that, I think, is where it gets kind of sketched, because you're rolling in, your coursework from your CC and trying to make it look like it's all UCLA, coursework when it's really not. So I'd say if you have some UCLA coursework, you can list that as your UCLA GPA, and you don't necessarily have to go into CC. And you're not hiding it. And actually, let me make this very clear. You're not exactly hiding the fact that you went to a CC, but it's just you have one page, and you're making you have very limited space. And so you're prioritizing what's important. So if you have work experience, skills, and different things that you need to list in there, it really doesn't matter that you're coming from a CC, because you're making the best use of the page, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So as far as the application process, I think that's definitely something that everyone should take under account. But then to kind of go into the interview portion of this, when you were in your interviews with different companies, did you kind of focus a lot on the process that you transferred, or did you kind of skip over that? Did you tell it as a story? Like, how did you involve that then when it came to the interview?
Well, so that's another thing. I mean, of course, some firms place more emphasis on the behavioral portion itself. But I mean, as you guys might know already, once you're actually interviewing, it's like 5 minutes, right? And they're like, hey, how's your day? How are you feeling? It might be, what kind of brought you through the door? And then it's just like 5 minutes is up. They're like, all right, let's just jump in. So your client is, and that's it. So there's not a lot of time to get to know each other. And, out of 45 minutes, if 40 minutes is dedicated to the case itself, then it's really not, so much about who you are outside of the case, but the case is a great proxy to learn a lot about you, if that makes sense. So if during the case, right, the interviewer says, are you sure about that? And you're really cocky and arrogant, and you're like, oh, I'm definitely sure. Like, there's no way I'm wrong, right? That kind of reveals some personality traits about yourself. And if you go on the opposite side of the spectrum, if you're like, I don't know, right? Then it shows that you're maybe like easily frightened, or like, maybe a little bit more like weak in some ways, where they can determine a lot of behavioral things about you by the way you handle your case. So to go back to your question, I really don't think that there's a heavy emphasis on, like, I've never gotten asked about being a transfer. And even if I was asked about being a transfer, it would just account for such a little part of the interview where it's pretty much like insignificant.
Right. Okay. Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I assume it wouldn't be too big of a part of it, but I think it's a little bit easier to kind of tell that about yourself in an interview than just listing it on a paper and being,
Exactly.
kind of in or out for that reason. So yeah, that makes sense. So kind of going back to the classes that you took at UCLA, did you feel like that at all prepared you for what you were in for in any of the jobs that you've done so far? Or did you kind of feel like it was a completely separate learning process for your career?
That's a great question. I actually think that my my coursework was not as applicable to the work that I was doing. So of course I've taken, Econ 11, Econ 1, Econ 41, a lot of those. I actually graduated as like an IDS major, right? So for me, of course I did take some poli-sci classes. I took some anthropology classes. I took, a lot of things that I was interested in along the way. But in terms of getting a job at consulting, it was just all independent study. It was all just, reading the case books, like reading a lot of cases, doing a lot of practice cases with my friends, and really just kind of being very diligent about it. I mean, I even remember being at the gym, I kid you not, whether I was like on the treadmill or doing like a hardcore workout, and I'm just listening to case videos like during that time. And so I was just all about it, dining halls, just like doing, estimates of how many French fries there are in Genève and things like that. Like, I kid you not, like, that was more what prepared me for consulting than any coursework that I've taken at UCLA. I mean, it's not to knock it. I think that it is interesting, definitely developed great writing skills, great critical thinking skills from, some of the formulas and equations, but in terms of even like the interviews itself, you're not really doing calculus, right? You're doing percentages. What's 30% of 5 million, right? Or things like that. So I'd say it's like independent study to, do well in the cases. And then once you get on the job too, it really is not tied back. Not to discourage you guys if you're, taking hard classes and you want to give up or anything like that. Like, I don't want to say, oh, it's useless, you'll never use it. But it serves a different purpose. It's not directly correlated with what you'll be doing on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So, going off of that, then were there any like resources as far as, outside of UCLA programs or, books or websites that you feel like were noteworthy to mention that, anyone that's interested could use as well to prepare?
Yeah, what I'll do, Jano, is I'll send you an email when this is all over, and I'll give you a list of like the books that I recommend, some videos that I recommend, some overall tips, and then I'm sure that you can kind of just, disseminate it out to everyone else.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so then going off of that, like at UCLA, was there any organizations or programs that you were involved in that did help you prepare, maybe just with networking or anything like that that we could get involved in?
So, of course, I think that, there are definitely groups, there's UPS, there's Bruin Consulting, right? There's a lot of different groups. I also found while I wasn't a member of those groups specifically, I had a lot of friends, and the friends of mine that were involved in those groups were friends that I would do practice cases with as well. So I was kind of like a pseudo member of a lot of groups just to kind of have, build up as much as I can. And in terms of outside of UCLA, not so much, right? I will say that I did network aggressively. So, anyone that I could have introduced me to someone that they knew that worked at a certain firm, maybe I'd make some of those asks if I felt comfortable, of course, or if I felt the relationship was there. And then I'd say it's really just saying, hey, if you have 15 minutes, can I like ask you a couple questions and just learn more about, how you prepared for, this consulting job that you got, right? And so usually I think I just, I spoke to people that were already existing consultants or people that were just aspiring consultants. And that was mainly it for me in terms of that piece. Nothing, I didn't have any exterior coaching or prep. I know people that did, but I never did.
Right. Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. So then as far as the application process, can you just kind of walk me through the timeline of, when it kind of started, when was the bulk of the applications that you did, when it kind of went into interviews, and then when you were hearing back, if you could just walk me through the process of that.
So it was very quick. And so once again, I'll kind of go through that timeline where, my first year on campus, I missed everything. And I was just focusing on getting good grades, really. And then by the time my second year rolled around as a transfer, then I had just really started applying to, I was really just gunning for like the top, like, I'd say 4 firms, right? It was BCG, Bain, right? And then I was like, all right, like Deloitte, right, McKinsey, and I was just like gunning for it. And so really, I know that I got, so my second year as a transfer, I actually got an interview at BCG. And for me, I remember in terms of the process, it was like very quick. I submitted my application and got a first round interview like super quick. And I was like, whoa, I'm not sure if I'm ready, but, I'll study up and try to, get everything together. And I remember feeling kind of like okay going into that interview. And the great thing is they actually give you feedback. And it was from that interview and the feedback that I really understood how unprepared I really was. Like, I realized that the bar was extremely high. I realized that they were looking for, the brightest, like people who can just tear through numbers with confidence, who can, genuinely come up with ideas that maybe they haven't thought of, after 16 times of interviewing candidates with the same exact case, right? And so literally, and this is funny for you guys, but my BCG feedback was like, you did okay, but you didn't really wow us. Like, it wasn't excellent. And that was like my feedback. And then he was like, you can be, you could be a little bit quicker on your numbers, right? You can, and he said, you pretty much gave us like the insight that we expected, right? But you didn't really think out of the box, right? And so I was like, man, like, if I need to get one of these jobs, I'm gonna have to really push it. And so I basically had an entire year after that to just really kind of like do at least, a couple cases a week. Like, really, I mean, I just had a singular goal of landing like a top like 4 consulting job essentially. And just with all that prep and all that focus, I went into, I guess, my third year then as a transfer with ultimate confidence, where I was like, I was casing with like MBA students at that point, and I was just really locked in. And of course, MBA students are a good resource too if you have them. But anyway, to really just kind of like hone in on that part of the question, it's just, there's the cycle is very quick. And so once you apply to the point in which you get that interview, it's very difficult to be able to get yourself up to speed in that short window. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the people that I've seen get the job are people that are generally people that have been prepping for months, right? And they have a general rule of thumb where they say either 100 cases that you've practiced or 100 hours. I guess you can maybe 100 hours of cases that you've done yourself is actually pretty hard to accomplish. So it's definitely like, more than a couple weeks, I guarantee you. So this is not to scare you guys, but it's to actually get you prepared for what kind of goes into it. It is nothing short of a consulting course that you have to put yourself through to be ready for it, So
Yeah.
I think that was a little long-winded. I apologize, but that's the most accurate answer I can give.
Okay, got it. Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of prep time needed before these interviews. So it's good to know that there's not much time after applying to prepare for that. So just going back to that, how many companies about did you apply to in your cycle of applications, and what was about how many did you get interviews from out of that?
Sadly, I can only tell you guys that so I only applied to 4, like the top 4. I was just locked in, and there's nothing wrong with Accenture, ZS, Mercer, or any of these companies. But for me, I was just like, like I said, I was just locked in, right? And so like I spent all my time like networking also to do that. So I developed, a lot of contacts, a lot of people that I knew at each of those firms. I knew the recruiters at least by face, to where when I saw them walking into the buildings, it was like, hey, and they're like, oh, hey, how you doing? So I wasn't spread out. And I think that there is even like a risk or an opportunity cost, so to speak, of spreading yourself too thin. Of course, you do want to hedge. And if you feel like you haven't been putting in like top tier preparation, and you think that, it may be really difficult given everything you have going on in your life. Maybe, you have difficulties at home, or you're commuting to school, and there's a lot of different things that, you feel like get in your way. You can apply to different firms, but if you absolutely want to just send it and apply for the top 4 like I did, I don't fully advise it, but it just depends on how much work you want to put in. But yeah, I had friends that applied to a bunch of other consulting firms too, and like I said, there's nothing wrong with it. It just you get spread because while I was a transfer, I was also working at least 20, 30 hours a week. I was catering, working in restaurants, working at events, bartending as well. So for me, I didn't have a lot of time to spread, and I had to be very calculated and strategic about the firms that I applied for and where I spent my time.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah. So to focus a little bit more on the networking process of that, obviously our interviews will not be in person, and it's a little bit of a different process for us. I kind of just wanted to hear a little bit about what you would suggest in, reaching out to alumni that might be working for these companies, or reaching out to anyone that we might know that's working to them, how would you suggest reaching out? What would catch their eye in an email? Just how to go about that.
So I think there's a few ways to answer that. So one is, once again, everyone on the call, you guys now by association know me now, right? Like now you've met me through, being a part of this event, and tuning into the updates here, kind of being hungry for that knowledge and tuning into more of these panels. So if anyone emails me or contacts me, I welcome it, right? So you guys can say, hey, this is my situation, and I'm really looking at getting into these kind of firms, and, connect with me. And I'm more than happy to. Those that know me on the line already know that I'm very supportive of helping others succeed, especially, maybe where I've struggled myself in the past. So in terms of networking, I think that you have to, one, know who your warmest contacts are, right? So if you know any like first degree connections who are consultants or former consultants, definitely reach out to those folks as soon as possible. Then there's kind of like your second degree, where it's like, okay, maybe you met someone by hanging out with Janu, then you're like, oh, hey, that guy's a consultant. Like, hey, Janu, can you introduce me to that guy? Like, I think, I might want to ask him some questions and see, how he prepared for his consulting interviews, right? So don't be afraid to ask for introductions as well, but you have to be ready. And I don't mean ready, like fully case ready by the time you get introduced to someone, but at the same time, the more case ready you are, the more that, connection can feel confidence in you and back you, right? Because if you had already done a lot of prep and you're networking, and then you say, hey, actually, if you have like 40 minutes, like, could you case me? Like, I want to make sure that I'm ready, to Bain standards, right? Then it's a great use of that person's time. And if you do really well, then they're like, hey, actually, I don't really have much to add. You did a fantastic job. Or they could say, actually, you might want to, tighten up these areas, but overall, good job. And either way, if they believe in you, then they can back you, and they can, they can actually maybe, vouch for you to the recruiter when it comes to, recruitment.
Okay.
But yeah, so there's like your first degree connections, then there's your second degree connections. And for your second degree connections, you want to be aware of how prepared you are. And everyone that I met through second degree connections, I can promise you that I came across as like very hungry and very focused. So where like everyone in my circle knew that I was like, eating, sleeping, and breathing consulting, where it was like, if I get you on the phone, I'm going to make sure that you feel that your time is well spent by helping me get closer to like, getting an offer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So just making sure you're not wasting that person's time, because obviously it's a really good first impression to make. So then kind of
Yeah,
going
if like anyone, if anyone on the line now on the call or, on the conference, like sends me an email, it's like, hey, so I have a question for you. What is consulting? I'm going to be like, well, hold on. Like you haven't done your homework, and so like, but if, Catherine reaches out to me and she's like, hey, I'm so ready, and I just want to, get 15 minutes from you, and I have very targeted questions, and I want to get your opinion. I have an interview next week, right? I'm more inclined to help because I see that momentum is there, and maybe she just needs a little push from me, and then she's got it, right? So just the level of preparedness makes a huge difference for the people that you reach out to.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. So kind of going on to what your actual job is like, I just wanted to know, when you first started working at your company, was it a very intimidating environment? Did it take a lot of time to kind of get to the point where you felt equal to your peers, or was it pretty welcoming and easy to transition?
Yeah, so I'd say it was pretty welcoming, right? Because once you get in, you're in, right? And so you see your peers. For Deloitte, I actually knew, a couple of the folks that that got hired with me at the same time as well. There was a batch of about 10 of us in my starting class, and I knew maybe like 3 already.
Okay.
Because 5 were from UCLA, I believe, 2 or 3 were from Claremont McKenna. One was like from Duke, and there was like a good spread for, the remainder, like 2 or 3 spots. But essentially, I'd say if you've done the work, right, you killed it on the interview and you get your offers, you have no reason to feel uncomfortable when you start. You're on level playing field with everyone else. Even if someone's like, I don't know, a child prodigy, kind of kid who's working alongside of you, it doesn't matter, right? Because you carried your own weight. You didn't get in by luck. No one did you any favors. You got in. You earned that spot. So you have no reason. I mean, there's, if you guys have heard of it, there's something called imposter syndrome, right? You have no reason to feel like an imposter. You didn't sneak in, slip in. These companies, they don't make mistakes like that, right? So once you get in, you know that you earned that spot. And so you should feel 100% confident, and no one, is better than you, right? You guys are all, now it's like you're starting from the start line now, once you start your job. So then what you do kind of defines your career. Some people are stellar and they're rock stars, and some people are not. In fact, Deloitte even ranks your performance every year, or at least while I was there, they did it from like a 1 to like a 5. A 1 was a rock star, and a 5 is, I don't know, basically you get fired because you're terrible. But essentially when you're starting out, you are on level playing field. Day one, it's up to you to decide what you want your consulting career to be like, and how much you want to accomplish.
All right. Makes sense. Yeah. So just don't be intimidated by, being new to the company, confident in what you know. So I just want
Right.
to know a little bit more about your day-to-day role. I know we've heard a little bit about the overview, but what you kind of do on a daily basis in your job.
Yeah. So I think, the funny part about consulting is that once you get the job, you're kind of also interviewing for more jobs. And I'll explain what that means. You get in and you enter this big staffing pool as a generalist. And then what happens is a partner or a manager will recruit you, right? And or not even recruit you, but they'll reach out to you maybe, or you reach out to them to try to get work. So a manager will say, hey, I looked at your resume and I'm looking for someone with these kinds of skills, can you start on this project, right? Or you have to like put yourself out there, and it's kind of like interviewing again, because you have to say, hey, I noticed that you are currently proposing work for this client, and I'd like to be a part of that project. Here are my skills. Can we hop on a call? So that's one part of it that I think surprises a lot of people. But in terms of day-to-day, once you're actually on a project, I'd say that the projects vary a lot, right? Because you're doing strategy and operations, but it can be something that's more, let's say, in like where I spent a lot of my time was like in M&A, which is mergers and acquisitions. So, it can be one company just purchased another company on paper, and they're looking to, maybe complete the integration of the two companies, right? Or it could be a company is about to purchase another company or thinking about purchasing another company. So they want to see you run the assessment to figure out, how much should they pay for it? What is that company worth? And you can even quantify the synergies, which is basically how much good overlap, the two companies have. And so each project is very different, and some projects you might even do some organizational like transformation, where consultants get a bad rep for basically coming in and helping advise companies on who to fire sometimes, because it's like, all about efficiency. So yeah, you may even have a project where it's just like, all right, hey, we have to cut 20 spots. We have to know who to cut. So we need you to develop a framework for helping us evaluate performance so we can understand, who to keep and who not to keep. So that's probably that's one of the more, internally difficult roles that you could be on if you feel like, you're attached and, it's hard for you to look at it in that purely like quantitative and qualitative like assessment kind of view. But yeah, the day-to-day just varies, and it depends on who your manager is, right, and how they like their projects to flow. Also depends on if you're on a domestic project or a traveling project. These days, I imagine that, there's everyone's working remotely still. But back when I was on, I was traveling to Seattle, to Arkansas, to New York, and pretty much every Monday morning at like 6 a.m. you're on a flight. Every Thursday afternoon you're on a flight back home. So you just live at your apartment, I guess, for like 3 days a week. And I'd say from a day-to-day perspective, they're paying you a lot, and so they're expecting a lot, and so it's definitely a high burn kind of job. A lot of times where, you might start working with the team at like 8 a.m. And then you might stay pretty late, straight into dinner with your team, and then may even, work past that. So I'd say you can be on an easygoing project where you're kind of 9 to 5ing it, like Monday through Friday. I would say 9 to 6ing it, but you also can be on a project where you're just like 8 a.m. to 2 a.m. for like, I don't know, a couple weeks straight. So once again, huge variance. Like an example of the chill ones is like if you're working on a healthcare project, right? Healthcare folks are usually like easygoing, I'd say. So maybe, a lot of them are going home at like 4 p.m. to go like pick up their kids from school, and it's very slow paced. So you might have an easier schedule there. But for for an M&A project where they're like, hey, like, we have 2 weeks to try to put a value on this company and, do our expert interviews and prepare a presentation to present to the CEO by like next Friday. I mean, you just buckle up and know that you're not really spending too much time at the hotel or at home at that point. So huge variance. I'm sorry I can't give you a very clear answer, but I try to provide more details, just to give you some of that vividness. So the typical consulting answer that you may hear over time is it depends. It depends on your manager, it depends on the industry, the type of work that you're doing. If you're remote or working on client site, right? All of those things kind of factor into, if you're having a mild week or a high burn week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then within your day-to-day, job, your day-to-day role, of course, we talked a little bit about this earlier. Technical skills when it comes to math and things like that are pretty basic level. But I just wanted to know, was there anything else, maybe communication skills, if someone's weak in, that kind of area, something that they should be working on beforehand that could help them in that sense? So if there's any other skills that you would suggest learning?
Yeah, so another thing as you guys, embark on your consulting journeys, I'm sure a lot of you are at different points. Some of you have even practiced cases before. Some of you may not even know exactly what a case is, and that's okay right now. But in terms of preparation, one thing that you will see is people talk about the airport test. And essentially what that means is not only do you have to be smart and be able to do well on the case interview itself and be, great with analytics, but if you're stuck at an airport for like 3 hours with each other, you have to be social enough for, the team dynamic to feel good, right? You have to be able to hold a conversation and have people kind of like enjoy being around you, right? Whether you're sitting next to each other on a plane, which doesn't always happen. I don't want you to feel like, oh man, I can't get away from these coworkers. It's not like that, but they call it the airport test because you have to be social enough for people to hypothetically feel like, oh, hey, there's that guy. And then you have a good time waiting for your plane to arrive. So, but in terms of like the interview, getting the job itself, I would say that the way it was explained to me and what I took very seriously was that you have to be great technically and you have to be great socially. And when I say socially, it's you have to be able to communicate, right? You have to be able to have confidence. You do even have to, at the interview, when you give your recommendation, right, you're like, okay, so I recommend that ABC company do this action for these 3 reasons. and you go through and you talk about it and you present very clearly and confidently, that is key to delivering your points. But the technical side is you have to have good points to talk about. And so that technical side splits out to, qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis. So you have to be strong with your numbers. I recommend you guys practice percentages, and of course I'll send those sites out at the end of this. Practice some of those percentages, be quick with mental math, right? And also practice thinking deeply at a qualitative level too. And some of that comes from reading Wall Street Journal, signing up to some of these get some of these business emails in the morning, right? Get into the mindset of, what are these businesses thinking about, or how these strategies play out over time, right? And so you really prepare so that you have great technicals and great communication skills, and you bring both of those into the interview with you, and you should be in a really good spot.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So just personable skills that would kind of apply to a lot of jobs are important to develop by this time. And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to get into a little bit more detail on the work-life balance of, of course, you've been at a couple of different places. I'm sure it's different throughout. And also, I'm sure it's different when you first start versus a little bit into your career there. I just wanted to know a little bit about the work-life balance, even just on the weekends and things like that.
So once again, that work-life balance is just such a crazy variable to unpack, right? Because I think it's one aspect of the job that even these companies try to emphasize when they present. They may say, hey, this has work-life balance, because that's what their analysis tells them that millennials are interested in, looking for. But my day-to-day experience, as I said, it just varies greatly. I still keep in contact with some of my friends that work at Deloitte today. They've been promoted, and they talk about how, I can call him on a Saturday and I'm just like, hey, how's it going? And he's like, dude, I'm just really going through it right now. It's just crazy deadline. So, I'll call you back in a couple hours. And I'm like, I totally understand, man. And so that's probable, and it can happen. But it once again, it comes down to how well that manager manages that project, if and what the project is. Some managers are like the overkill kind of managers. And what I mean by that is sometimes there's a deck that has to be presented to a client, and it may be 12 pages long, right? Mm-hmm. And some managers will have 12 pages and then maybe 5 pages in the appendix, right? And some managers may have 12 pages and 40 pages in the appendix, right? And so pretty much what that means is that some managers like to have a backup of 40 slides where it's just in case the client asks this question specifically, right? We'll go to, the appendix slide number 36 and show them right here that it has that answer, right? And some managers are not as diligent, and they say, within a 95% likelihood, here's what this entire conversation will be about, and we can just provide, a few additional slides, and that should put us in a good position. Now, of course, these clients pay a lot of money for, the work of consultants. So, sometimes it's really good just to show that value and show how prepared you are. And I get that perspective as well. But sometimes it's that kind of prep to go over the top and really over deliver that can just kind of, permeate through the whole team, where it requires really high burn kind of input, right? So if a manager is very confident that they can deliver and not burn you out, then I think that you'll be lucky and that can happen. But sometimes they're just hey, this is just what needs to be done. And so you just get it done. I don't know if you guys all follow it, but on Instagram, there's the, consulting comedy and a couple of pages that are really funny. But one of the jokes is that a partner may sketch a slide and it just looks really rough. And they're like, hey, can you put this together? Shouldn't take too long. And it's like 5 hours later, right? And that could be because, you put together that draft, you put that content, you send it to them, they send it back to you with edits, then you clean that up, and then you send it back to them, and then send it back to you with edits. And so it's a lot of back and forth that ensues based on the initial premise of like, yeah, put this together, like it shouldn't take too long. So, you'll see that there's a lot of folks where I'd say the bar is really high. And so it can come off like typos are just like forbidden, right? The level of detail, like partners, senior managers, they all have this eye where like if there's like a box that's not aligned, they'll be like, whoa, and it's a big deal. So, it is being very meticulous. I think sometimes that takes a lot of that extra effort and extra time of yours. So work-life balance, once again, that was just a really deep dive to explain that it depends on your manager and the type of project and the type of client that you have. Because sometimes client requests can come in where they're just asking you for even more stuff, and they try to expand the scope to where you agreed on one thing, but they're like, oh, actually, can you give me this too? And you're like, whoa, and and your manager says like, all right, Khiry, like you got to do it, so, and some of what puts the time, where the time goes is, as an individual, you're really putting your mark on what you're doing. That you're working with these Fortune 500 clients, so you want to do the best you can. And if you're genuinely interested in it, then, I think there are a lot of times when a consultant will say, hey, I know that you said this looked good yesterday, but I wanted to go that extra step, and I actually spliced it this way and prepared it this way, and I think this will be even better. And so I just took a couple hours last night to, redo this. And then the manager was like, this looks great. And, that kind of extra effort is also rewarded as well. So, work-life balance it's a very elusive thing, I'd say, in consulting.
It depends. Right.
Yeah, it depends.
Okay. So kind of just to our audience out there, you can start sending questions into the chat. I know a lot of you already have, and we mentioned a little bit earlier, but if you had anything to ask, you can go ahead and send that in as we're getting to the end here. So just a few more questions. These are more not really technical towards your job, just other side information. So were there any, misconceptions or anything that you might have thought about the consulting industry as a whole before, and then you realized they weren't true? If there's anything you wanted to share in relation to that?
No, I'd say like, with the research and preparation that I had going into it, it was pretty much what I expected. But it was just really cool. I was very open to just like learning as much as I could and being a sort of like sponge, right? And using it as a platform to like build out my weak areas to where like when I started, and we all do it. We all on our resumes, we put like proficient in Microsoft Office, right? But I mean, I can't even fathom like where I was in terms of like my Excel skills when I started versus like where I am now. And that's because I put a conscious like effort into turning into what I like joked around with some of my colleagues as like an Excel baller, right? And so, now I feel like an Excel baller, but if I look back as to when I applied and I put like proficiency in like Excel on my resume, I was like, no, you weren't. You weren't proficient. And this is not to discourage you guys from putting that at all. This is just, it was just a little joke and, personal reflection. But in terms of, what I experienced once I got there, I knew that it was going to be intense work, and I knew that I was expected to be, on my A game. And I was kind of thrust into some situations that I think really tested that. As someone who's out of college, who's being trusted to just weigh in on, very important issues where, I mean, some of these things no lie, you see the headlines in the news the next day after you're working on a specific client, like, or you help create a strategy, and then you see the headline for like X company buys, a company for X amount of dollars, and you're like, hey, I helped put together that valuation. It's huge impact. So in terms of what I expected, I think it was everything I expected it to be, and I think that I grew more than I could have expected in the time that I did. So, after my first project or two, I felt like, all right, like, this is awesome, and I was just really rolling. So, nothing, no surprises. You just go in with an open mind, be very hardworking and diligent, and learn as much as you can.
Right. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so this is something that I'm sure a lot of people are wondering. At least out of who you knew, maybe your own peers, did you feel like consultants tended to specialize in one industry or prefer to go into a certain industry, or was it pretty well spread?
Um, I'd say there's just a huge spread, of course, like, so the hardo like space to be was like M&A, because it was like, oh yeah, I do these hard hours, right? And like, I'm it's the closest you get to IB, right? Investment banking, in the consulting world. So I think that there was a lot of coolness that came with that, and the people that were in that circle, I think, were really close. But I'd say, there are some people that were just really interested in, like biopharmaceuticals, really, Deloitte has a really strong like healthcare practice. So there were some people that were like, hey, I really like healthcare. Like, this is awesome. Some people said, hey, I love media, and entertainment, because being in LA, it's like, you're so close to all these major studios, in Hollywood. So I'd say it's just spread, and everyone can go where they want to. And if you're aggressive enough to pursue the sort of project that interests you, you can always find a partner or a manager who's doing that type of work who you can connect with, who you're like, hey, even if not this time around, like, keep me in the loop for your next project, and like, I'll hop on and just do whatever I can to gain that experience, So
Mhm.
I'd say it's very open, and it allows you to explore a lot of different industries and project types.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Um, so kind of just wrapping it up here, I think this is one of my last questions I had for you. But I just wanted to know, what are some of the common exit opportunities for your role? Obviously, you transitioned into ed tech. What kind of made you want to make that switch? And what are kind of the common exit opportunities that people tend to go into?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, one of the things that they tell you up front in the corporate presentation, when you go to these events, is that they have wonderful exit opportunities. And I actually don't think that that's an overstatement at all. I think that one piece of it is, a lot of these big firms will sponsor you for getting your MBA. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can do your MBA and come back and you get a promotion, and they cover the cost essentially, without going into too many details. You do have to be eligible for it and like apply for it, basically saying like, you have to do a presentation to say, hey, I'm interested in going to B school. Here's what I've done during my time at Deloitte. So I'm going to go to B school, and I want to come back and be an awesome like senior consultant.
Mhm.
So going to B school, I think that there are a lot of folks that do that after consulting. And then in terms of getting jobs at these companies, sometimes you're working for a client and you just really build a strong relationship with that client. And then they pretty much kind of poach you from the consulting firm, where they're like, hey, I like Janu, like, let's make her a full-time offer and save on some of these consulting fees or something like that. Now, contractually, I think that there are some things that, make that a little bit of a tricky situation for some companies, but generally there's a lot of poaching from the consulting space. And, with the type of work that you're doing and how comfortable you get with like execs, you can definitely expect like a pay increase, because they'll pretty much make it really enticing for you to leave consulting and work with them directly.
Mhm.
So that could be working directly with a client that you've worked on before, or someone else. But lastly, I'd say that there's the route that I went, the entrepreneurship route. I'd say that that's a little less common, just because you're getting paid well. If you're traveling, all your meals are expensed during the week, right? So you can save a lot of money and you're making a lot of money. So it's really cool. But entrepreneurship it carries a lot of risk. There's a lot of like, oh man, like what if I don't make it? And, I'd say that consultants are generally like risk averse kind of people. I mean, you're getting paid to help make sure that big companies make very calculated decisions. And so I wouldn't say that there's a lot of consultants that go into entrepreneurship right away. But I decided to go that route because I'm very passionate about Opti and what we do with high school students.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. And I think it's also kind of a field that a lot of people I'm sure enjoy because, again, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of different things you can get into. So, you can kind of find your niche and see what you like. So jumping out to the chat questions, just a heads up for everybody, I will be skipping over a few questions if they have already been answered or, just to kind of keep it relevant to what this presentation is about. So the first question I'm going to ask is from Jessica. She asked, going back to your time as a transfer at UCLA, did you have to petition to stay a third year or extra quarters? She's wondering because she's considering doing the same.
So I kind of gamed it a little bit where I technically had like a few leftover credits that I needed to take that additional quarter to satisfy. So I couldn't get kicked out because then, I didn't earn like graduation yet. So I left just a little bit for me to just like, all right, I have an easy course load and I can just recruit aggressively during that, during the fall quarter of that third year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you did most of your recruitment that third year that you were there?
No, I did recruitment in my second year.
Okay.
But I got an internship with KPMG during the winter actually of my second year. And then I got that offer and I still wanted to sort of trade up into consulting because the KPMG job wasn't exactly consulting. It was like evaluations under the tax practice. And so, yeah, I just kind of additionally went to recruit again to make sure that I can get a consulting job.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so our next question here says, can you share a little bit about your experience getting into your first internship? Because in her case, she didn't have too much finance or consulting experience, as we're incoming right now and kind of going straight into recruiting. She doesn't have much experience on the resume. So just kind of where to begin, what to focus on if that's not really your strong point at the time.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I'll first, the first thing I'll say is that, so my companies, I run two companies. One is a nonprofit, one is a software company. I am accepting interns. So Jana, you can spread that information as well at the end of this. So I can help out, of course I can't take everybody, but I can help provide some internships. And all of the internships that I have, I always train people to kind of think in that consultant kind of way, because it is something that is very natural to me and my training. So I help kind of prep my interns for consulting along the way. But the second part of my answer is that when you're preparing for your first one, you kind of put yourself out there. You got to, each and every one of you has to do that assessment to see what skills you have, like how, if you're competitive for the roles that you're going for. One thing that I did at KPMG that helped me out was I was going for a certain role, but before I submitted the application, I actually spoke to the recruiter, who's still Lauren Marker, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this role. Like, here's my resume. Based on this, like, do you think I'd be a decent fit for this position? And she said, actually, I think you'd be a great fit for this position instead, which was the EVS position. And so then I applied for that one just because I wanted to get a big four, financial firm like on my resume, but then also be able to like, one, I would have been like kind of okay with that at the time, but just, I wanted to have something strong that can put me in the best position to land a consulting offer. So for the first interview, for the first internship, do an assessment of your skills, what you're bringing to the table, see if you're competitive for the one that you want to, for the internship that you want to get. And then don't be afraid to reach out to a recruiter and kind of like ask them if they think, you know, at least on paper, you'd be a decent fit, you know, for the role, and say that you're passionate about it. And, you know, they might advise you, they might try to slot you in somewhere else where your chances are higher, actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's great advice. And then moving on to our next question, I know we've been focusing a little bit more on transfer advice, but someone had asked, do you have any advice for incoming undergrad freshmen to guide this a little bit more? I'm sure just things that they can be doing right now to help them prepare for a career in consulting.
Yeah, so there are actually some firms that take on like summer scholars. So you might want to look into that. And sometimes you can be a sophomore. So maybe not exactly yet, but in terms of what you can do as a freshman, you want to beef up that resume as much as you can. Maybe join, you know, Bruin Consulting, you know, get some experience in consulting. This is, of course, if you're set on consulting or you're at least, you know, very interested in it. But I'd say the earlier you prep, the better off you are. Because I had prepped so much that by the time I went into the interviews, like by my like third year, it was more just staying sharp rather than you know, like stressing. Like I went into like my final round interviews like just mellow, you know. I was like excited, of course, but I was not nervous at all, and that's just because I had that whole year since the BCG interview to like prepare, and I went in there like confidently. So, you know, just kind of multiply that by, you know, I guess X number of years or months that you have to prepare. If you're just more exposed to it at an earlier age and you're working through some of those mental math exercises and working through some of those cases, by the time you're actually looking for that full-time job and applying for those, I mean, you should be good to go. You should be a real case interview baller.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And then I think I'm gonna wrap it up here with our last question from the audience. He asked, are your clients comprised of both individuals and businesses? If so, which is a higher value client and why?
For like what I'm doing today or during
I,
my consulting time?
I think he's referring to your consulting time. Mhm.
Are my clients more individuals or businesses, or sorry, restate it?
Yeah, he said, are your clients comprised of both individuals and businesses? If so, which is a higher value client?
Yeah, so, I mean, Deloitte and any of these like firms, I mean, actually, I don't even know what an individual would look like, because a lot of times you may be an individual at a business. So maybe, you know, you're at a huge corporation and you're the CFO. So you want to hire Deloitte, right, to come in and help you with some financials. So you may engage as an individual, but you're representing a larger organization. Another part to that is that the consulting fees are nowhere near cheap. So I saw what they like, the first time I saw what they billed me at per hour, I was like, whoa, I was like, that's crazy. So I say that to say that, you know, if it's just a small business, like, you know, they're probably not going to bring on Deloitte for like consulting services. They might, if they reach a certain threshold of revenue, they might, you know, engage with Deloitte for auditing, or for, you know, possibly for tax purposes. But, you know, for consulting and like the very expensive strategy pieces, usually you're just talking about, actually, and they pride themselves on like the percentage of Fortune 500 companies that they work with. So I think maybe now they're starting to get into some startups, right? And they're doing these interesting deals where maybe they're, you know, maybe taking like a percentage of the company in exchange for helping the company grow. But yeah, a lot of time these are like really large companies that pay top dollar.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So I think that pretty much wraps it up here as far as our questions for today. Just a little reminder, I did get another question. I didn't address it because I know we went over earlier, but somebody asked, were there any specific clubs that you had joined that helped you? So as we mentioned, Khiry's going to share some of the resources that he might think that are helpful for you guys. So we'll definitely send out an email to everyone who is subscribed to our mailing list. So if you're not already, that would be great to join that, so you can get those resources. But yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I know this is really helpful for transfers. As you said, hit the ground running. So there's a lot to remember right now. So this was some great advice. And to everyone, just a reminder, next week, Tuesday at 6 p.m., we have our third panel of our 3-week series. And we're going to be talking about product tech with our panelists. So if you're interested in that, definitely join us. So yeah, thank you again, Khiry, for being here today. We really appreciate your time. We really do. So thank you. All right. Bye, everyone. See you next.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hold on 1 second. 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, as a closing statement, so yeah, of course, thank you for having me again. I just would be remiss if I didn't leave you guys with 2 things. So of course, one is, feel free to reach out to me for internships, and once again, Jana will pass that along. But 2 is, as a transfer, things are very difficult, and that's okay. So I just want to show you something. I have this mouse pad for Opti, and it has my name on it, Khiry Kemp, but it also has a quote at the bottom. And what that quote is it says, "Legends are made in the transitions." And that's a quote that I need to, that I love to be reminded of every day. And so the transition, no matter how small or how big, right, the transition is everything. And for you guys have successfully transferred, right, from a CC to the #1 public university in the world, right? And so your legend, right, really begins now. And what you want that story to be is up to you. Legends are made in the transitions. You guys now have all the resources at your fingertips. When you're applying to these jobs, you have the stamp of UCLA, you have no excuses, nothing holding you back, and you need to really push, right? And this time is everything. Like, the job that you get coming out of college is extremely important, so you need to really lock in and transition successfully. And I think that you guys are all intelligent. You guys are all embracing the hustle by being on this chat and this conference tonight. So I just want to, motivate you, inspire you, and tell you that you can do it, and put your best foot forward, work diligently, and yeah, your legacy starts now. So that's it. Legends are made in the transitions, and I hope that sticks with all of you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's such great advice. I think for any field you're interested in, kind of throughout your whole professional career, really great advice. So thanks again, Khiry. We appreciate your time. Okay. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, guys.
Thank you, Khiry.
No problem.
Thank you.